this is like an introduction on restorative practices and how the circles and why the circles are very, very important on conflict, but not only on conflict. And we have seen that you can also use it as a tool or as an approach on how you as a leader can manage your team and also trying to have the best result you can. So if you can see in this square, we have four basic approaches to try to maintain social norms or behavioral limits. So sometimes in life, we kind of like go between these four approaches, but maybe I will try to explain. You can see the arrows. You can see if you are implementing a punitive approach is when you have high control. It's like when you are like in an authority limit and people is not able to like express themselves. And in this area, when you're so punitive, also people feel a lot of guilt because you punish them because they behave not in the way that it was supposed to. So that is one of the behaviors or approaches you can implement during a conflict. Another type that you can be too low limit or discipline that you can become permissive. So in this case, it's like you allow some behaviors, but you support the person in a way that not actually trying to improve the behavior, just letting things happen. And yes, I know this is not good, but I don't do much to try to set up some boundaries and limits. And also there is the other behavior, and it's neglectful, that you don't put any discipline or any limit, and you also don't give any support. So in this person, you're saying, I don't care about you, so that's your problem. Or this is a conflict that is happening and you don't put attention to it, and that only makes it worse, because if you don't put attention to it, the problem or the conflict is only going to increase. So if we try to set up some boundaries and limits with support, that's the restorative. The idea of restorative is that you try to be with the person in the conflict, or try to resolve the problem with the person, not to the person or for the person, or not do anything at all. So the idea of the restorative practices is that you can have a high control, but also with high support. And this is the main characteristic of being supportive. And that's like the base of the circles, is that the idea of dealing with the conflict, setting some boundaries, but also letting people to have a voice and let themselves be the ones that actually come up with the solution. So this is how we actually implement our programs at AMOS too, because when we try to implement any kind of programs in our communities, we say that we don't do it for them or to them, we do it with them. So what is a circle and why circles? So the idea of a circle is that you can find a good solution to the problem. So how do you do it and why a circle? So the idea is that we can get acquainted, and you can build relationship and address the issue, and you can come up with an action plan after you finish the circle. So the idea of sitting, sharing, and dialoguing in a circle, it's what actually helps to talk about the conflict and give everyone a voice. So in the circle, you're not just there to hear, but you're there also to participate, because the idea is that you are in an equal level. And sometimes when there is somebody that has more power and the other one doesn't, so sometimes that doesn't allow the people to say what they're feeling or what they're thinking. So the idea is that you can try to create a safe space when they can discuss things and issues. And in that way, you can connect to others. You can strengthen that capacity to show up. to actually have a voice. And also you can develop this collective wisdom to find solutions that it's helpful to every member of the circle. And there are a lot of types of circles, like supporting talking circles, and also you can have a circle to celebrate something or to heal a conflict, or sometimes you can have a preventative circle when you use it to as a tool to prevent things to happen. If you give this space people to talk how they're feeling before it becomes a problem. So how do you prepare for a circle? You need to know the objective of what is the expected result of your circle. That's the very important thing. You need to have separate meetings beforehand with the circle members, and you explain the methodology, and you make sure that they agree to participate, because in these methodologies, you don't force or obligate anybody to participate. You you invite the person, and they are the ones that make the decision if they want to participate or not. So that's the first thing. And then you have to think about all of the logistics, the place, like where am I going to do it, the time, the date. You need to find a quiet, calm place for the activity. Think about how people is getting there, like transportation. And also you need to find what we call a dialogue piece. So you can think about the dialogue piece as a symbol. So it depends on what type of conflict you are dealing with, that you can think a dialogue piece that actually can help, or at least can try to neutralize and be very symbolic to the conflict. So, for example, in the past, we have used, how do you say, peluches?
Home animals.
Yeah, animals. And sometimes that led people to like be calming themselves. They could like be touching, because the texture is very smooth. So it depends, but the idea is that you carefully select the symbol that represents something for the conflict or for the problem that you're dealing with. And it's very important, you want to make sure that there is a balance, the power balance in the circle, because you don't want to have an imbalance of power in the circle, that it's everybody against this one person. So you have to make sure that there is a balance. And the idea of being a facilitator is not, we are not the protagonist, we're just trying to facilitate the dialogue, and ask questions, maybe to facilitate that the people express themselves, but not making any opinion about the problem or come up with any solution.
Maybe I can just say one more thing. I think that facilitator role, as Gabriella is explaining, I think has been really key for us. And when we've used circles, we've been very intentional about selecting someone, say if there's people on the same work team together, select someone completely outside and removed from that team who's been trained in circles facilitating, who is not being affected by the conflict. We've had situations where it's staff between two teams. Maybe you want to potentially have the supervisors of those staff people, but it's both of them. Neither of those supervisors of the staff on their team are going to be the facilitators. That's a very important piece of this, is the selection of the facilitator and someone who's really skilled at listening and asking questions. So we're going to go into a little bit of the steps of setting up a circle. So the piece of what is a circle, Gabriella already addressed it, but we're talking about a physical space. And I know, Dr. Laura and Dr. David, as some people who have trained a lot of us, and Miguel Tello, who's been sort of our master trainer, there really isn't important about the physical space and seating arrangement. So sometimes if you just like are getting a group of people into a circle just to talk randomly, a lot of times people will just like pull up a chair and it will be kind of an oblong oval. And it's important to try to like really make the chairs in a actual circle, because not just for the symbolism of that we're all equal around the circle, but because we don't want people sitting kind of in positions where you can kind of lean back in your chair and hide behind the person next to you, that so that someone can't see you across the circles. We want to be able to all kind of see each other really well around the circle, and be spaced out enough. So that's for the kind of the seating part. Often too, in terms of setting up a circle, Gabriella talked about the dialogue piece or the talking piece. Oftentimes, when we set up a circle, you can put sort of a cloth, a tablecloth or a blanket or something that with a candle or just something that is sort of like centering for the group as well, kind of in between in the middle of the space to kind of set up the space as more of like a sacred space. For step number 2, um, the opening and intro and the welcome icebreaker. So and maybe just going back to, I think, like these pieces, Gabriella was mentioning up like the setting up of the circle before we went into step 1. It's kind of it's really has been super helpful for our facilitators when they've led circles to just take a little bit of time to sort of write down for these steps, like what is going to be my talking piece, or if I'm bringing a couple that people can choose from, like what are those going to be, or kind of those things that were mentioned to think about to set them up to write these down. So writing down and choosing a reading, a meditation, a song, a prayer, something to bring people into the moment, to be really present and focused, and listening to each other. That's really important. If we're doing this in a setting, people, to be invited to the circle, people most likely know each other, but we can do these in certain moments where we need to kind of introduce one another for doing preventative or getting to know you or relationship building as well. Explaining the methodology, so allowing people to understand the what to expect as the circle begins, that we're going to, after we introduce each other, which is the next step I'm going to get to, but we're going to be setting some ground rules and values as a group together, and then we're going to be going through some questions, and we're going to give everybody a chance to speak, and we need to we're going to be listening to one another, and the dialogue piece is going to be used, and then we're going to be taking some time to write down some action steps that we're going to come up with together. So just kind of going through the basic sort of order of how the circle is going to be conducted, and sort of the objectives of the circle in general. So depending on the type of situation, that like the reason for you setting up this circle, people should know coming into it, especially if we're talking about the conflict to like peace basically, but setting that up to establish why are we here. And again, even saying something about the dialogue piece and why it was chosen, and how it's going to be used. And it really helps, especially in a conflict setting, to, besides the sort of reading or prayer meditation, to call people to be present. Sometimes it helps, depending if people do not know each other super well, to have kind of an icebreaker question. So there's an example here, which is like a little more on the light side. If you were an animal, which would you be and why? But an important part of the reason why it's a restorative practice, the relationship element of this, and for people to be able to see past sometimes like the really intense emotions that are involved in a conflict, to try to listen to each other and learn something from one another. An icebreaker can be helpful to begin that process. So setting up values and guidelines, to me, this has been one of, I feel like, super valuable and important, very important aspect. You don't want to skip this when doing a circle. So when we're in a conflict, we're so often reactionary. but setting trust and values around the norms that we're going to use when we're in this space together. And basically, we do, well, often you can see in the picture there's a like a butcher paper set up there. Sometimes it might be a whiteboard or something, but having something to write down our norms is going to be a setup you want to have as well for like writing down next steps, possible solutions if there is a conflict. So, but we want to have people to share a value. So let's say respect is a value that someone might name. You write down respect, and then what does it mean to show respect to one another? Paying attention. Don't talk to the people sitting next to you. We're not going to have our phones out. They're going to stay in a basket by the door. There's several different things that we can write down to be really specific to say how we are going to show respect to one another. Confidentiality needs to always be something that people need to like understand is important for the space of the circle and to agree to. Love, like there's different values that sometimes are often mentioned, but how we make sure that the group identifies how they understand the expression of that value is really important. And then what's important too is that often we'll go around and we pass the dialogue piece to share the values and the norms and to say how we would express this. Once everybody's gotten a chance to go around, we often we do a second round to pass the dialogue piece. Sometimes people have nothing else to say and everything's been shared and expressed, but sometimes we all have different styles for how we express ourselves, especially in a group setting. And so some people on the first round may pass and not have anything to say, but as they get more comfortable, they might be willing to share and want to say something in the second round. So that can often be an important element to even just the beginning of the dynamics for the group.
So the next step is actually the circle activity. So try to think about questions or a guiding question and take turns answering around the circle. Sometimes it could be challenging how the situation can become while you are actually doing the questions and how people react to it. But that's why it's very, very important to set up the values first, because you as a facilitator sometimes need to remind the values. Remember that there are some values that we said that we were going to respect, and that's very important. And I just wanted to reinforce that. So there are like templates of questions that you can use in any type of conflict, like what happened, what were you feeling, and how do you think that has impacted others. For example, it doesn't matter what type of conflict, those are basic questions that you can use. You don't have to think very deeply to develop the questions, but the idea is that you can come to the circle with your actual questions on mine, or you can have a notebook when you can have the questions written down there. And also sometimes you can use it to take some notes, because the idea is that when the round of answers around the circle finish and you have the dialogue piece again, you can do like a summary of what people said, for example. So an example of questions for working as a team could be, what does it mean to you to work together as a team? What gives you hope for this week? And how can we deal with conflict if we have any this week? I use those type of questions with my team. And so the idea and what I have seen, it could be the ideal number is 8, including you. So that's a really good number, 8 people.
More than that, right?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes the idea is between 6 and 8. More than that, it will take so long. And sometimes if you can, if you only have like 4 people and you don't have all the people that it's involved, sometimes you just have one portion or one part of the solution in place. And for challenging situations, you can use questions like, what do you think when you heard about what happened? So the idea is that you need to make open questions, not yes and no questions. You need to have questions that invites people to express what they felt and what they think. And the other one could be also, what impact has this had on yourself and others? That's a very important question, and you always have to include it, because sometimes people does not realize how their actions impacted on others. So that's very important that you don't forget that question. And the third question is, what do you think should happen to make things better? This type of question is the ones that actually can take the problem into a solution, or the conflict into restorative practice. The idea is that you just don't do a circle to let people express, but also try to heal, or try to um, repair the damage. So this kind of question is what it helps people to reflect and think how they can make things better, actually, in concrete action. So you can come up with an action plan after this kind of questions. Sometimes you need to make a question again, because you can feel that is a superficial solution, and you know that you need like a deeper solution. So sometimes you need to ask a different question to come up with a solution and agreements. And you let people try to express how the conflict affected them, and then you talk about solutions at the end of the circle. And it's very important that you, as a facilitator, reiterate the agreement. You can also at the end try to do another round of questions to see if everyone agrees, because sometimes um, people is very shy to say, no, I don't agree with that, that won't be the solution. So you need to be very open. And when I say open, is like you need to read people, you need to be um, not only listening, but see their body language too, because you sometimes that's very important. And you can make another question to try to see if that they already expressed everything that they wanted to express. And you need to do follow up for the agreements. So that's very important too. So this is the agreements, and how are we going to follow up on them to make sure that we are actually doing what we said that we were going to. Because sometimes people just don't just do it for a week and then they forget. So the idea is that you can do a follow up for at least a couple of weeks to actually make sure that people is empowered and it's following the agreements. When you have your solution and your agreements and your follow up plan, it's very important how you close the circle. And there are different options. You can be very creative on this, but sometimes simple things as a poem or a prayer or a song, or even some type of meditation, seals that agreement in a way that you can feel that you are like relief. Like we talked about this, we come up with a solution, and there is a plan to make sure that things are going to be better. So that's very important. And in this picture, for example, so we did this series of circles, and there were 6 facilitators. And at the end, what we did is that we did a big circle to make a prayer as an ending activity, for example. So we did it with AMOS staff member, all of them, during the civil unrest period that we experienced 2 years ago here in Nicaragua. The idea is that you can have a moment when you can like try to have a moment of peace or reflection.
Lifting up prayer.
Yeah.
Those weren't done related to our staff being in conflict with one another, but was more in the situation. And the last kind of question of what can we do to make the situation better was more of like, how can we support one another? What things can we do within our control within the situation? Yeah, to support each other. And so like those were what was written down by each group as kind of things that we can do, like next action steps.
Yeah, and here there is an example of circles at AMOS. So we did circle to support staff during the crisis. So an opening question for this kind of circle was: imagine a Nicaragua in peace. What does that look like? Because in that moment, we were not having peace and we were having conflict and violence demonstrations everywhere. So that kind of like does not give you a room to actually think about how a Nicaraguan peace looks like, because we were only seeing um, on TV and on social media and also in real life violence. So that helped people to actually think and dream on a Nicaragua in peace. So that was a really nice question to try to talk about these crises that we were going through. So you can see here some examples that we use during that time, like questions, example of questions like, how has the crisis affected you and your family? How has the crisis affected you at work? And what can we do to support each other? Because we knew that we didn't have the solution of the problem, because it was a big problem and it was like a social political problem. But the idea is that the people can actually think, how is this affecting me and my family? Because sometimes you don't actually have the time to reflect on that. And maybe you don't think it's affecting your family, but it is. So you have to think about that. And also, how the crisis affected you at work. There were people that did not have the chance to express themselves because they were leaders of a team, and they had to like always show that they are strong. And what can we do to support each other? It helped us to think about, okay, I cannot solve this problem in my country, but I can do things that could improve how am I feeling and how others are feeling. So these are some examples and of questions. And after sharing and reflecting, staff member made some agreements such as be in solidarity and be understanding and don't judge others, have faith in God and do everything with love, for example. So if you see, these are not solutions for the problem, but these were agreements that actually help people with different opinions about the problem to work together in a way that we were feeling God's love, and that we were not being judged by others. So that was very, very important for us. I remember that there was an before and after those circles, and people were less stressed and more relieved. And I think that was one of the best examples on how we have implemented circles, and the outcomes were like renewed commitment to serving the most vulnerable in the name of Christ. What does that mean? There was a time where the team said communities are running out of medication and we are not able to provide them because of the roadblocks. And the team did not hesitate on saying, we're going to try. We're going to try to see if we can dialogue with the person in charge of those roadblocks and see if we can get those medications to the communities. And they did. And also, it increased the team cohesion among the staff despite political differences.
Yeah. Well, so we just wanted to make a mention that, we've been sharing the circles methodology and how to use it as a restorative practice and the steps to take. But the traditional way of doing that is being in person and in a group. And right now, with the situation of COVID-19, we know that that's for a lot of people not really possible right now. And I think also I was just kind of thinking as you were talking, Gabriella, for things that a lot of us experienced when we were, going through the socio-political crisis and the violence and stuff here in Nicaragua, was sometimes the isolation or the feeling of isolation. And it's, in a different way now, but with people, having to stay home, having that like human connection could be really valuable for people. So replicating, like, how could we do the circles methodology through a Zoom call, for example? You can still have a facilitator who's like your host. You can replicate the function of a talking piece and establish an order for the speakers. So when you use something like Zoom as a host, you see people and they like keep the same order basically on your screen. You can see that snapshot there of that's actually our communications and development team. So we're doing a team call, and so you can see how you can sort of name what the order of speakers is, and that way people can know who comes before them, who comes after them. And you can have the facilitator moderate that as you kind of pass from person to person. You can still do an intentional opening, and having the guidelines, setting that up, sharing the values, how we're going to implement it together. You can have people, share individually and speak it, and you can also use the chat box as well if people want to express themselves, write something out. Doing something to establish trust in the group. So I love this question of what is a value that you're leaning into at this time. So as we're all socially distancing at home, what is helping you to stay sane is, is maybe another thing, or take care of yourself. So those are some things to help set the circle up. So choosing like 1 to 4 questions to do a circle depending on the time you have, and doing things at a distance, it helps to end with a hopeful kind of question to reflect on things. So some examples: what does this moment in time mean to you? What is the hardest part of this situation to you? Something that you want to let go and release into the circle. Something that might be really weighing you down and you want to kind of lift up in prayer or let go of. What's bringing you comfort? How do we support each other? It's kind of one of those things, like, as a group, what are some solutions or things that we can come up with, and what gives you hope? So on Zoom, if any of you are using it, there's a breakout room element that you can do. So you can set it up to have, groups of, 4 or 5 people or something in a small group, and it lets you kind of split people off from a big call where everybody sees each other, and you might have 1 or 2 questions that, as a small group, people can share with each other. I found that really helpful as well if you have a little bit of a larger group in a call but want a sort of a smaller group feel.